There is a name for a kind of school that no longer quite exists. Not a building, not a lecture hall, a path. A covered walkway in Athens, in the 4th century before the Common Era, where a man and his students would walk while they thought, and think while they walked, until the walking and the thinking were no longer two things. The school took its name from that path. Peripatos, the walked around, and the word is still with us, folded into the language, though most people who use it have never noticed what it contains. Something was happening on that walkway that a chair could not provide. The question is not why those men walked. The question is what the walking was doing, what it was giving to the thought that arrived at the end of it, and whether we have any idea, now that we have mostly stopped, what it is we are no longer receiving. There is a school of thought, one of the oldest in the Western tradition, whose very name is a description of how its members moved. Not what they believed, not who founded it, how they moved. The name comes from the Greek word for a covered walkway, a peripatos, a shaded corridor designed for walking back and forth, the kind of space where you could think without the sun stopping you. The school that used that walkway eventually took its name from it. The practice became the institution. The motion became the method. That detail is worth sitting with, because we have inherited almost everything else from that tradition, the logic, the categories, the questions, and we have quietly dropped the one thing the building was named after. Here is the tension, and it doesn't resolve easily. We still call ourselves thinkers. We still believe that serious thought is our work, our contribution, the thing we are paid and praised for. And the posture we have assigned to that work, the posture we have designed entire buildings and chairs and screens around, is stillness, seated stillness, the body held in place so the mind can go where it needs to go. And yet the tradition that gave us the very word for rigorous systematic thinking, the tradition that worked out the forms of argument we still use, conducted that thinking on foot, not as recreation, not as a warm-up to the real work, as the work itself. The walking was not preparation for thought. The walking was where thought happened. Those two things do not sit comfortably together. Either the ancients were doing something we have since improved upon, and the desk is simply the better tool, or they knew something about the order of operations that we have, in the course of building our offices and our workflows, quietly forgotten. Neither answer is obvious, and that is exactly where this needs to stay, for now. Jean-Jacques Rousseau came to the Ile Saint-Pierre in the autumn of 1765, having been driven out of 2 countries and stoned from a village in Switzerland. He was 53 years old. He had written the books that would remake European thought, and he was exhausted by them, by the controversy they had caused, by the men who had used them against him, by the effort of having produced them at all. The island in Lake Bienne was small enough to cross on foot in an hour. He had not planned to write there. What he did instead was walk, every morning without a notebook, without a stated destination, across the island's meadows and along its shore. He gathered plants, which was a habit he had kept for years, pressing them, naming them, recording them in a herbarium that he carried more carefully than most men carry their manuscripts. But the botanical work was almost beside the point. The point was the motion. The point was that his mind, when his feet were moving and the lake was visible at the edge of his sight, arrived at a state he could not produce any other way. He would later describe those weeks on the island as the happiest of his life. Not productive, happy. The distinction matters. He was not composing arguments. He was not building toward anything. He was walking until the noise in his head settled into something he called reverie, a word that sits between reverie and dreaming, a state of thought that does not push toward a conclusion. The book that came from those walks, Reveries of a Solitary Walker, which he began writing years later and never finished, is structured as 10 promenades, not 10 chapters, 10 walks. The form of the thinking and the form of the book are the same thing. He was expelled from the island after 2 months, by order of the Bernese Senate. He would spend the rest of his life trying to return there in memory, trying to recover in prose what the walking had given him. He never quite managed it. The thought that arrives on a path does not always survive the desk. What Rousseau found on that island, and what he spent the rest of his life failing to reconstruct at a desk, was not a mood. It was a sequence. The feet moved, The lake was there at the edge of sight. The noise in his mind settled, and then something arrived that he had not planned and could not have forced. The walking was not the setting for the thought. The walking was the first step in its production. This is what the Lyceum's covered walkway was also doing, though in a different register. Not the solitary reverie of an exile, but the back and forth of argument. 2 or 3 people working a question up and down a corridor until it gave way. Different in tone, the same in structure. The body in motion, the mind following, the thought arriving somewhere neither person could have reached sitting still. Thoreau, in the 1862 essay he called Walking, puts it more or less this way, that he cannot preserve his health and spirits unless he spends 4 hours a day at minimum sauntering through the woods and over the hills, not as exercise, but as the thing itself. 4 hours, not a walk before work. The walk is the work, or at least as the condition without which the work would not come. What shifts, looking back at all of this from a slight distance, is not the conclusion. There is no clean conclusion, but the framing. We have been asking whether walking helps thinking. That is the wrong question. The people who walked to think were not supplementing a process that could have happened anyway. They were obeying an order of operations. The moving came first, the arriving came second. The desk, if it appeared at all, came third, to catch what the walking had already given. Rousseau never returned to the island, but the walks he took there produced a book, even if he couldn't finish it. The thought survived the desk long enough to be written down. What didn't survive, what he says in the reveries he could never recover, was the state itself. The reverie, the open, arriving quality of a mind that is moving and not yet trying to conclude. Rousseau never finished the reveries. The 10th promenade breaks off mid-sentence. He died before it was completed. What remains is a fragment about a day 50 years earlier, a day he had spent walking with a woman he loved. He was working his way back toward something. He did not arrive. The desk is where we go to catch what walking gives, but the catching is not the same as the giving. Anyone who has tried to remember, at a desk, the exact shape of a thought they had on a road, and found only the fact that the thought existed, not the thought itself, already knows this. The knowledge is not new,